All video games are made out of code. They're a series of variables, conditions, and operations executed in a very particular order in order to make very particular things happen on the screen in front of you based on your inputs. Knowing this, there's been a community of ROM hackers for years, diving into the code of old video games and changing things slightly so as to make something drastically different happen than what the game normally allows. Hack and Slash is a video game built around this idea. It doesn't really try to hide that it's attempting to look like Zelda, from the green tunic that your main character wears to the fairy that follows you around like Navi from Ocarina of Time. The crucial difference, though, is that the very first thing you do in Hack and Slash is break your sword, revealing the USB stick that can modify variables in the game world. Since your sword is useless, you don't really attack enemies at all in the 6 or 7 hours that the game lasts for. The whole game is a giant puzzle where you reprogram enemies so that their health goes down to 0, or so that they're no longer evil, or so that they'll be the solution to the current puzzle you're trying to solve. The game is broken up into 4 acts, starting with Act 2 and ending with Act 5, since presumably Act 1 is where you got thrown into your initial jail cell where you break your sword. Acts 2 and 3 are relatively straightforward and involve a series of puzzles that just involve changing the variables of anything with a USB port until it does your bidding. When you get to Act 4, you meet a new character who has a fascination with algorithms, a kitty named Script, and a device that allows you to modify not just an object's variables, but also the algorithm that governs what the object does with those variables. You get some very interesting puzzles out of this that are literally solved by changing the Lewis scripts that the game actually runs on. Yes, this makes it very possible to break the game, but developers at Double Fine accounted for this with an amulet you get early on, which allows you to revert back to the beginning of a room at any point in time, which very strongly resembles a programming project's revision history. Anything different you do from here will start a new branch, so if you don't like what you changed, it's just a matter of switching to the correct branch. Now, if Acts 2 and 3 are best described as a non-programmer dipping his or her toes into the waters of programming, then Act 4 is like doing a cannonball into the pool, and Act 5 is getting waterboarded. The difficulty curve of this game is so bizarre. In Act 4, they throw terms at you that a lot of non-programmers aren't going to be familiar with. Return statements, arguments, algorithms, breakpoints. I can imagine a lot of people who've never programmed before having a tough time with Act 4, but they'll get through it. Act 5? I am a programmer, and those puzzles were tough for me. What's really strange, though, is that I can't say if non-programmers will be able to get through this game at all. Yes, I had a tough time with puzzles in Act 5, but that might have been my own fault. When you're hacking scripts at this point in the game, they present you with every script associated with that object that the game actually runs on. As such, not every script is actually relevant to the puzzle at hand. Most of them aren't, actually. I spent so much time looking through all the lines of code trying to figure out what I could and couldn't change to get me through particular puzzles. But the truth is that usually there's only one script with code that's way simpler than the rest of it, with one line that you can change quite simply that will solve the puzzle. It doesn't mean that my approach was wrong, but I was making it harder than it had to be. When it comes right down to it, the puzzle was often just about figuring out where to look for that simple script. Maybe, without all those old programming habits, a non-programmer will have an easier time solving these puzzles than I did, but if I was a betting man, I'd bet that these endgame puzzles are actually just tough in general. A quick note about those puzzles. As I said, they often involve modifying the game's Lewis scripts directly. On the final puzzle of the game, I actually solved it reasonably quickly, but the game didn't update the room properly after I entered in the solution, leading to a half hour or so of being completely confused as to why it wasn't working. I reverted back to the beginning of the room, and since the script was already modified, everything started working again, but it wasn't without some frustration right at the end of the game. Fortunately, that was an isolated incident. All in all, I really enjoyed this game, but perhaps that's because programming isn't a daunting task for me. Hack and Slash has the classic Double Fine wit and charm, some really good puzzles, and it plays really well with an Xbox controller for those interested in playing in Steam Big Picture mode. But there are just a few times where it's really advantageous to use a keyboard to type out an answer to a puzzle. As I played through this game, I thought it was not only fun, but it also might have a place in a high school programming classroom. I just wish the developers of this game had spent a little more time deciding if it was intended for expert programmers or for people who've never programmed before.